Thanks, Matt. So, Dave and Matt and I have the same shirt on, if you kind of noticed, and people have been asking us about that. And they have these little symbols are compass symbols. So, yeah, I know. Oh, it's really cute. I know. And so today when we showed up, Dave shows up today, and Dave has this Costco shirt on, and Dave works at Costco. And so Dave, was so happy to say, look at my shirt, it's got a little compass on it. Yeah, and all of a sudden he pulls out a bag, and he says, I got one for you and for Matt. And he goes, I go, oh, that's really nice. I'm looking at it, and then I could tell he wanted us to wear it. I go, so you want us to wear it? And he goes, that'd be really nice if you did. And I said, okay, I'll arm wrestle you for it, Dave. And then when I beat him, I felt bad. And then I decided to wear it. But anyway, Dave came up with this and gave it to us, and Matt and all of us. And so for one time, you'll see us wearing it. Yeah, it's a uniform, yeah. If you want to be cool, you can go down to Costco and buy one and wear it in respect for Compass. So this morning we finished our 3-week series of messages we've been studying called You Have a Chance with Jesus. And if you were here last week or the week before, we studied Zacchaeus. Remember the wee little man? And Zacchaeus was a person we said had no chance. We put him in the least likely list of people in his day that would come to faith in Jesus. Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector for the Romans and who his own people hated him, he would be on the least likely list of somebody who would come to faith, and yet he became a follower of Jesus. And then last week we looked at the last chance list, and we looked at the criminal that was crucified next to Christ. Remember, there were 2 of them, and at the last possible moment in this man's life, he comes to faith. And that would have been his last chance. So we called him last chance. So we've looked at no chance, and we've looked at last chance. So there's one left. It's what? Second chance. There you go. One person got it right. And some people call a second chance a do-over. If you're a golfer, you call it a mulligan. And I looked up the history of mulligans. And it was like 2 pages long. And I was going to share that, but I decided that's another sermon for another day. And so today we're going to look at the second chance. And the guy we're going to look at in the Bible is Peter, the Apostle Peter. Max Lucado, who's a Christian writer, he said this, sure, you can have a second chance, just ask Peter. And if you know Peter's story, you'll remember that at the Last Supper, when they all were gathered together, Peter boasted to Jesus and said, hey, guess what? I will never fail. I will never deny you. It doesn't matter what these other guys do, but I'll never do that. Matter of fact, he made this statement. He says, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and death. And then Jesus responds to Peter and says, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Talking about bursting someone's bubble, right? You say to Jesus, hey, I'm not like these other guys. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I'll go to prison. I will die for you. And then Jesus comes back and says, really? Well, tonight you're going to deny me 3 times. And so what happens? Peter denies him what? 3 times. And it says that Peter went out and he wept bitterly. I've learned this over the past week. One bad night can change everything. It doesn't take much to mess it up. So Peter is a guy who definitely needed a second chance with Jesus. And so do we, right? I mean, we need more than a second chance. How many of you need like a 3rd chance and a 4th chance and a 5th chance? Yeah, okay. I found this church. I loved the name of this church. It's in South Carolina. It was called Second Chance Church. I thought, well, where's 3rd chance church and 4th chance church? Some of us would be like 5th chance, 6th chance church. Yeah, there you go. Looked to me like a Safeway there for a while, but it's actually Second Chance Church. So we're going to pick up our story today in the book of John. If you have your Bibles, turn there, John chapter 21, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 17. And a little background on John 21, we find that Jesus has appeared to his disciples a couple times, and now is going to appear to them after his resurrection the third time. And he told them, he said, hey, meet me in Galilee. So the last time he appeared to them, he was in Jerusalem, and he says, hey, I want you to go to Galilee. I'll meet you there. Now, I looked this up, and I didn't realize this, but Galilee from Jerusalem is 131 miles. And it would take 41 hours at 3 miles an hour to get there for some people. Others of us, it might take longer. So it was a 4 to 5 day walk from Jerusalem to Galilee. And so it took them a couple of days to get there. And when they got there, they were waiting for Jesus to show up. And apparently they had some time on their hands. Because what happens next is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you my favorite verse in the Bible. So what do they do when they're waiting around for Jesus to show up? Well, I want you to notice Peter, the fisherman. In John 21, verse 3, it's my life verse. Simon Peter said to them, I'm going what? Fishing. I love that verse. I've told Kathy many times, fishing's a biblical concept, Kathy. It's in the Bible. And then it said, they said to him, they being 6 other disciples who were with them, we'll go with you. Now, it's interesting to me that some Bible commentators think Peter was wrong when he went fishing. And he was really wrong when he got 6 other guys to follow him. They would say it's Peter's example of going back into the old ways. And he got other people to follow him back into what he used to be. Others think he was totally fine to go fishing. Some see it as the fact that maybe they needed some money to support their ministry. And so instead of like asking for money or people thinking they're lazy and waiting for a handout, they went out and fished to get this fish so they could make money off of it. Well, you know which way I believe on that. Obviously, it was the right thing to do, of course. These guys remind me of Norman MacLean, who wrote the book, A River Runs Through It. Remember that in the movie? And in the movie it says this, our father was a Presbyterian minister and a fly fisherman. He told us about Christ's disciples being fishermen, and we were left to assume, as my brother and I did, that all first-class fishermen on the Sea of Galilee were fly fishermen, and that John the favorite was a dry fly fisherman. That's a biblical thought. I thought about that. So these guys were fishermen, and that's what they were going to do. And I want you to notice what happens. It says they went out and got into the boat, but that night what? They caught nothing. What do we call that? Fishing. Skunked. There's another name for it. They call me 007. 0 bites, 0 fish, 7 hours. I'll remember that, okay? Matter of fact, Sean Palmer told me, where's Sean? He went fishing yesterday, and he didn't have a 007, but he had 1 bite. No fish, 7 hours, right? And we were talking about it last night. I just started laughing. I got to tell you this. Because I said, all of us who've been fishermen, who fish, have had 007. We all have. And some of you get that quite often. And I'll let that go. I won't go there. But then guess who shows up? Verse 4, look what it says. Just as the day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? Have you ever noticed that if you tell someone you went fishing, what's the first question they ask you? Did you catch anything? What I've noticed is this. What I end up doing is find out if I got skunked, I just don't tell people I went fishing. That way I never have to say I didn't catch anything, right? And so it says there, they said to him, no. I mean, Jesus knew anyway. At least they were honest. There's something I've noticed about fishing. Honesty and fishing don't always go together. I'm just saying. It's kind of like golf. But you golfers, I don't want to pick on you, so we're talking about fishing. So Jesus gives them a fishing tip. Verse 6, look what it says. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul all that they had because of the quantity of fish. This is interesting. Do you realize in the Bible the disciples never caught any fish without Jesus' help? They never did. And some of these guys were commercial fishermen. They were expert fishermen. But every time they went, it says what? They never caught anything. They were experts. I thought I was an expert. And one time, Kathy was in the boat, and Grandpa, and we were at East Lake, and Grandpa caught this little fish, and I was netting him and putting it in the boat, and Kathy goes, "Oh, I think I got something." And I look over, and her fishing rod's just going straight down. And I said to her, being the expert, "You got the bottom." "Oh, you got the bottom, Kath. Just pull on it, it'll come undone. You got the bottom." And so I looked back at Grandpa, and pretty soon I heard Kathy yelling at me, "I don't think the bottom does this." And I looked up, and her rod just, this fish is just taking off. And then 20 minutes later, she catches this brown trout. When I saw it down in the water, I just said, we're going to need a bigger net, But it was an exciting time. And then everybody who walked, Kathy, she's so quiet. And then everybody who went by our boat, she would go, "Look at my fish." She would hold it up. Poor thing. We're trying to let it go. And, but anyway. But it is pretty interesting because if you study through the Gospels, remember back in Luke 5 when they went fishing and they didn't catch anything, Jesus told them, "Throw your nets into the deep." And remember, then their nets were completely full. And then in Matthew 17:27, he told them, "Hey, go to the lake, throw a line in the water, and the first fish that you catch, open up its mouth, and you'll find what? A coin. And you can take that coin to pay your taxes." And I prayed that would happen to me, that I could go fishing to pay my taxes. But there is something to the fact that when Jesus is around, good things happen. I have a good friend that I used to fish with a lot. He moved to California. And every time we would go fishing, he would always pray beforehand. He'd go, "Hey, Jones, we got to pray." And so we would gather around the boat, and he would pray, and he always would end this prayer like this. He would say, "Lord," he said, "if you should see fit today to give me the biggest fish, I will give you the glory." And he wasn't lying. That's the kind of guy that he was. He was an outgoing, loud, kind of obnoxious guy who loved the Lord. And so I remember we were out fishing one day, and we were slamming them. And there were all these boats around us. You've been there when you've ever been out fishing. And so all of a sudden, this boat's catching all the fish. And you're all around them, and you're not catching anything. And they're just slamming. And they're all yelling, and you're over there looking at them like, "What?" Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's what this guy said. This guy yells out, "What are you using?" And my buddy stands up. T.J. Mahoney, a classic man. He stands up and he said, "Did you pray today?" That's what he says. He goes, "I prayed. And the reason we're catching fish is because we prayed." "Did you pray?" Never would tell him what he was using, right? He just condemned him because he never prayed before he fished. I love that guy. But life and fishing are better when Jesus is in it. Just is. When Jesus is there for you to give the glory to. So let's go on. Look what happens. Verse 7. Then it says, "The disciple whom Jesus loved, John the dry fly fisherman, therefore said to Peter, 'It's the Lord.'" How did John know it was the Lord? Because John had been on that fishing trip back in Luke and had seen what happened when Jesus showed up. And so he knew exactly when they caught all these fish all of a sudden, hey, that's Jesus on the bank. And so he says, "It's the Lord." And then it says, when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put out his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. Now, Peter was always impulsive. And you know what I mean by that. I know he was impulsive here. You never put on your heavy clothes to jump in the water to swim to shore. You do just the opposite. So he was stripped because he was working. And then all of a sudden he puts on his cloak and then jumps in the water to swim to shore because it's Jesus. There's an interesting thought here is this. Instead of running away from God like Jonah, and by the way, if you want a great fishing story, Jonah's one. The only thing is that the fish wins in Jonah's fishing story. But Peter's running to God, not away from him. If you're running away from God today, my question is why? Why are you running away from him when he loves you and he wants to restore any broken relationship that you might have with him? And all of you who've tried to run away from God in your life know that it cannot happen. You cannot run away from God. I remember when our son was small, he would hide in his room. And he would, he'd go, "I'm hiding." And we'd go in there, and he'd be laughing underneath the bed, right? And you'd go like, where are you, Kip? Where are you? And you'd hear this giggling going on. Because we knew where he was. Well, imagine trying to hide from an omniscient God who knows everything. If he wants to go after you, he will. And he will find you. And he will work in your life. And so here you find that going on here, that Peter goes toward the Lord. But I want you to notice what happens in verse 10. He says, after he gets there, he makes this connection with Jesus. It says, Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. I love this part about what John writes here. Because first of all, he gives to us the size of the fish. He says what? It was full of large fish. Now, some of you I fish with, you are here today, and we have a code that we go by. And the code word is this. If you catch a fish and it's not very big, you say what? This is a pretty fish. Exactly right. So, we'll catch a fish, and you'll be over there in your float tube or whatever next to them, and they'll go, hey, how was that fish you caught? And we'll say, it's a pretty fish. And that's code that means it was really little. I've caught fish so small that when I lifted them up, they fell through my net. Okay, that's not a very big fish. So we call those fish pretty fish. And that was our code word for that. I did a little more research because maybe I had too much time on my hands. But what did they mean by a large fish in the Sea of Galilee in Jesus' day? A large fish to them would have been about 2 pounds. That would have been a large fish for them. We would call that a what? A pretty fish. But it was a large fish. But fly fishermen are nerds anyway, because we have code names for everything. We have code names for our flies. Because someone will say, what are you using, right? And you could say that, well, I'm using a black leech pattern. And then all fly fishermen would go, oh, yeah, I know what that is. Or you could say to them, I'm using a black psycho. And they would go, oh, yeah. And they have no idea what it is. And that's what we do. We don't ever tell them what we're using. We would say, we have code names like Psycho, Greenie, Red Eye Special. My favorite is Turbo. I have a fly called Turbo. I got a black turbo and a green turbo. And someone will go, what are you using? I go, a black turbo. I go, oh, yeah, thanks. They got no idea what a turbo is. And if they knew what it was, they would never use it because they think it'd be illegal. It just has a propeller on it. So when it goes through the water, it flashes and it makes a little noise and it attracts the fish, right? That's all it is. But so we have code names for everything. And so did they. I thought that was funny. And then the number of fish. This is even better. What's the second question that people ask when you've gone fishing? They ask you, how many did you catch? And how many did they catch? It says their number was what? 153. Listen, fishermen's numbers are known sometimes to be off. I'm not saying mine have ever been because I'm a man of the cloth. Okay? But not here either, because in the Bible, if it says that there were 153, there's what? 153. I thought about this. I thought, I wonder if John wrote down 158, and then God whispered in his ear, hey, John, it's 153. Okay, 153. I had a friend who gave me a Christmas present one time. He gave me a fish counter. And I never really understood why. Why would he do that? Well, you know why. Because for fishermen, 10 fish, 15, 20, it all gets foggy after that. And then every year you add another 5 on. And so, hey, we had a 30 fish day. That's what we would say. But these guys knew exactly how big the fish were, and they knew exactly how many they were. And the fishing part's a fun part of this story. But this is a part that makes a lot of sense to me. There's a transition that takes place in this story. And the transition is this. Peter goes from being Peter the fisherman to Peter the shepherd. And I want you to notice what happens. Look at verse 15. It says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Keep in mind, when Jesus said to Peter, do you love me more than these was a reference to the other disciples that were there with him. Imagine they were sitting around a campfire, eating breakfast. All of them were there. And Jesus looks at Peter and says, Peter, do you love me more than these guys do? And remember Peter's arrogance. These other guys might desert you, Lord, but I never will. He totally kicked his friends under the bus. And I'm sure they were listening to Peter's response. I'm sure it got really quiet. Don't you think so? Really quiet. They wanted to hear what what Peter was going to say. So the first question says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And you'll notice that the word love there is the word agape, which is the highest form of love in the Greek language. It means a self-sacrificing type of love. He says, do you love me, Peter, more than these? And look at Peter's response. He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Peter uses the word phileo, which is the word for brotherly love. In other words, Jesus says, do you love me with agape love, the deepest self-sacrificing type of love? And Peter comes back with, Lord, you know me. You know that I like you a lot. You're a very close friend to me. And what did Jesus say? Feed my lambs. Jesus comes back in verse 16. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me with agape love? And again, Jesus uses the word what? Agape. Peter's response, Lord, he said to him, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And he uses the word phileo. You know I like you a lot. And Jesus said, tend my sheep or shepherd my sheep. And then the third question, verse 17. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? This time Jesus uses the Greek word phileo. Peter, do you like me a lot? Are we friends? Peter's response, verse 17, was, Peter was grieved because he was said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love, phileo. I like you. I like you a lot. You know, Jesus just wants us to be honest with him. He knows us. And what did he say there? Jesus said to him, sorry, Peter, because you don't love me with agape love like I love you. I can never use you. Go back to fishing. Is that what he said? No. He says to Peter what? Feed my sheep. Here's the point I want you to think about today. One thought. Peter, the fisherman, becomes Peter the shepherd. Peter in that moment went from a fisherman to a shepherd. Listen to this point. Jesus refused to let Peter's failures define his future. Jesus refused to let Peter's failures define his future. So many of us live in the jail of our past. We look back on our past life and we say, well, I've done this and I've done that and I've done this. And God, how could you ever use me? And we put ourselves in jail. And the enemy wants us to think that way as well. Don't sign up to help out. You know who you really are. And we live in the past. And the past puts a jail around us. And we can never seem to break out of that. And Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus will pick us up again and give us a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance. And I want you to think about that. There's tremendous freedom in forgiveness. Tremendous freedom. You know, so often we allow the enemy to keep us believing that we have not totally been forgiven of our sin. And we live in the past. And when Christ comes into our life and we accept him, when he died on the cross and rose again, he died for our sin. He took our place so that we might inherit his righteousness. He took our sin. We get his righteousness, his perfection. And we live in a place of total forgiveness before him. And yet we continue to condemn ourselves because we truly haven't understood his forgiveness of all that we have done. You say, how do you know that Jesus really forgave Peter? Because if you think about what happens here is this. Jesus was giving Peter his most prized possession to watch over his church. He says, Peter, I want you to feed my church. I want you to watch over my people. And these are the people, according to Acts 20:28, that he had just died for on the cross and rose again, that through his sacrifice on the cross, they might be in his church, in his family, a part of his body. And he's turning those people over because he's going and ascending to heaven to Peter and the apostles. And he's telling Peter, Peter, you denied me 3 times not that long ago, 30, 40 days ago. And guess what? I am forgiving you totally of that. And I'm going to put you in charge of watching over my people, the people I just gave my life for. I want you to watch over them. If you're a parent this morning, let me ask you this question. Who would you let watch over your kids when they're small? Who'd you let watch over them when you finally left them with somebody else? Yeah. It wasn't just some random person. When our kids were growing up, when they got into, later elementary school and middle school, we always told them, Kathy and I would tell them this, don't ask us to spend the night at someone's house where we don't know the parents. Because if you do, the answer will always be no. They could be Mother Teresa's grandkids. Okay, she was a nun and she didn't have any kids, I know. I mean, okay, don't fact check me on that one, okay? But you know the idea. They could be the greatest people in the world, but if we didn't know them and we didn't know what their home was like and we didn't know what they stood for and what they believed in, the answer was always no, because our most prized possession, our kids, we weren't just going to give to anybody. And here you find Jesus, 30 days after Peter denied him, giving Peter the responsibility to oversee and feed his church, his people. That's forgiveness. And that's what forgiveness is all about. Today, Jesus gives us a second chance because he wants to use us. It's so interesting, Peter's life. If you follow him in the Gospels, he's all over the place. He is the one that jumps out of the boat to walk on the water and then starts to drown. But at least he jumped out of the boat, right? All the other guys wouldn't even try it. And then Peter's the one that all of a sudden Jesus says, who am I? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And like moments later, Jesus tells him he's going to go to Jerusalem and die. And he goes, no, you're not. And then Jesus says, what? Get behind me, Satan. I mean, Peter's God speaking through him one day, and minutes later, Satan's speaking through him. That's Peter. He's all over the place. But when Peter gets to the book of Acts, and on Acts 2, when the Spirit of God comes and fills the apostles, Peter becomes the rock. Because in Acts 2, you'll find that Peter stands face to face to the men who put Jesus on the cross and basically says, guess what? I'm going to obey God, not man. And they put the pressure on him to cave. They put the pressure on him not to preach the gospel. And the apostles did what? They rejoiced when they got persecuted because they felt worthy to be like Jesus. They were different people. And it's that Peter, the forgiven Peter, the Peter that was walking in freedom of forgiveness, the Peter that didn't look back to his past to hold him back. It was that Peter that God wants us to be. He wants us to have a new opportunity, a second chance. Here's the final thought today. Jesus will take your mess and make it your ministry. He'll take your mess and make it your ministry. I know a lot of people, a lot of you today, and in my own life, I know that God took the things of my life, the good, the bad, and the ugly of my life, and has used that to mold me into the person I am today and the ministry that we have today. And so many people have done it. Hey, I've done some really crazy things in the past. And if you've given that over to Christ and you've forgiven of your sins, you find that those crazy things that you did, God has used that for you to be able to relate to other people who've done crazy things too. And you can relate to what's going on. And God uses your mess as your ministry. But I know what it's like to go from one thing to another. When I was 19 years old, I went to college. And my goal in life was to teach PE and coach basketball and baseball. That's what I went to college for. And when I was 19 years old as a freshman in college, I realized that I was the Lord of my own life. And at 19 years old, I grew up in the church. I had faith in Jesus, but he wasn't the Lord of my life. I was the Lord of my life. And I remember one day just saying to, okay, I'm all in. I'm going to give you, Jesus, everything I gave sports and everything that I'm going to give you the time and the effort and the energy. I'm going to put you the first place in my life. And I went into ministry after that. God led me to be a pastor. I had never, ever in my whole life ever thought about being a pastor. I look back and I, why? And Kathy married me before I told her. No, no. No, we were engaged, though, when I told her, hey, by the way, I'm feeling called to go into ministry. What? That's not the guy that I engaged, But she felt God working in her life as well. And so you know what I'm saying? God can change us and forgive us and use us just the way we are. So maybe you're here today and you have issues. If you have issues, you know what I want to say to you? Join the club. I'm telling you what. If we renamed our church, right, Matt, we'd call it Issue Church. Hey, this is a church. Everybody has issues. But the difference is we know where to go to get forgiveness. And we know where to go to get transformation. And we know where to go to have Jesus on our team. And when Jesus is involved in it, it's always better. Let's pray.